nations were the Uz and the Saka, or Scythians, who established control over the lower Indus Valley. The Uz settled in Bactria and largely assimilated with the local people over time. After the waves of nomadic invasions calmed down to some extent, the Parthians then conquered much of the east, up until the Indus River. The Parthian Arsacid dynasty was very hands-off in their style of governance, and were content as long as taxes were paid and men supplied to the army when needed. And as they became increasingly focused on halting Roman expansion into Mesopotamia, the Parthian noble family that had defeated the Scythians and had seized control over the Indus River seceded from the empire, establishing the Suren kingdom, or more commonly called the Indo-Parthian kingdom. And although they ceased to pay taxes, and their king claimed equal status to the Parthian great king, the two states appear to have been allies and deeply involved in each other's politics. In the north, the Greco-Bactrian people and Uz tribes formed the Kushan kingdom, and became an empire at the expense of the Parthians, and then expanded deep into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. The Kushans worshipped Greek as well as Hindu gods, but gradually over time, Buddhism became more prevalent and was widely promoted within the empire's borders, and even without, with Buddhist merchants and missionaries traveling to Han China, which many believe were the first to introduce Buddhism to China. The Kushan Empire was the crossroads of the world. Manufactured goods from as far away as China, Rome, and Aksumite Ethiopia would have been common sights in the great cities of the Kushan Empire. In the west, the Parthians succumbed to internal infighting which allowed the Sassanid Persians to overthrow them. Viewing themselves as the re-establishment of the ancient Achaemenid Persian Empire that Alexander had toppled, the reinvigorated Persians successfully campaigned to the north, south, east, and west, quickly overrunning the Kushan Empire, and established the Kushan Shahs as vassal kings of a greatly diminished territory, and were gradually stripped of their military and administrative power. During the intermediate period of Sasanian decline, the nomadic Kidarites and then Hephthalites gained control over the eastern portion of the empire, and like the Uz before them, they largely adopted much of the local culture before being reconquered by the Sasanians. It was during Sasanian rule that the first recorded instance of the term Afghan was made in reference to the people inhabiting the mountainous eastern provinces of the empire, and is likely derived from the Pashtun ethnic group, which is the largest in Afghanistan. By the time of this region's conquest by the Arab caliphates, Buddhism and the Persian Zoroastrian faith were the dominant religions in the land. That proved difficult to control. Whenever a large Arab army left, the locals would rebel and revert to their ancient customs and self-rule. In the east, Kabul managed to remain an independent, wealthy city-state controlling trade through the Khyber Pass to India, ruled over by Buddhists and Hindus. It was not until the late 9th century that the Safarid dynasty, founded by a Persian coppersmith born in southwestern Afghanistan, successfully rebelled against the Abbasid Caliphate and firmly established local rule, that Afghans began to convert to Islam, which the dynasty widely promoted. The Safarids were overthrown by the Samanid Empire, whose rulers claimed descent from the Sasanian Persians, and extensively promoted Persian culture and Islam throughout the empire. They made the mistake of utilizing Turkic slave soldiers, which in time overthrew them and established the Ghaznavid dynasty. Based out of the city of Ghazna in eastern Afghanistan, they continued the policies of promoting Islam and Persian culture, particularly among the nomadic Turkic tribes that were settled within the empire. The Ghaznavids were greatly weakened by conflict with the Seljuk Turk Empire, which allowed for their overthrow by the native Ghurid dynasty, which had recently converted from Buddhism to Islam, and were possibly of Pashtun descent. During the reign of Sultan Ghiyath al-Din Muhammad, the Ghurid Sultanate became a major world power, stretching from the Iranian plateau to Bengal in the east. However, after Ghiyath al-Din's death, the empire fell into infighting, and was rapidly conquered by both the Delhi Sultanate in India and the Empire of Khorasan, both of Turkic Mamluk origin. Only 15 years after their conquest of the Ghurid Sultanate, Khorasan was overrun by the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan, who frequently massacred the populations of cities that did not immediately surrender. The Mongol Empire split into several successor states not long after their conquest of the region. The Il Khanate, as the name coincidentally implies, fell ill and was ravaged by the plague, wiping out much of the Mongol royal family and army. And as the Il Khanate fragmented into many small states, the Tajik vassal princes of Herat established a sizable kingdom for a short time. All of these small states were conquered by the Turco-Mongol warlord Tamerlane, who inflicted even greater slaughter and destruction throughout the Near East than the Mongols had done a few generations before. Timur frequently used Afghanistan as his base of operations, and his descendants moved the capital from Samarkand to Herat. The century following Timur's death began with peace and prosperity and ended with internal strife and civil war, with its territory being lost to the Uzbeks in the north, the Safavid Persians in the west, and in the southeast the emergent Mughal Empire, which would go on to conquer most of India, claiming descent from Timur and Genghis Khan. Throughout the 17th century, Afghanistan became a largely autonomous buffer zone between the powerful Safavid and Mughal empires. In 1709, the Pashtun Hotak dynasty successfully rebelled and established a short-lived empire by conquering a great deal of Iranian territory. The Safavid Empire was overthrown by the soldier of fortune Nader Shah. He was the son of a common herdsman and one of the most brilliant military strategists ever to have lived. He reconquered Afghanistan and defeated Ottoman and Mughal armies, but his reign was brought short when he was assassinated at the age of 48. One of his cavalry commanders, Ahmed Shah Durrani, was a Pashtun and returned to his homeland, where a Pashtun tribal confederation selected him as their leader. He used his military experience to great effect, conquering those cities that did not join his cause in Afghanistan. And during his long 25-year reign, he successfully campaigned in India 3 times against the Marathas and Mughals, and even sacked their capital city of Delhi in 1757. The Durrani Empire is considered the foundation of the modern state of Afghanistan, and Ahmed Shah Durrani as the father of the nation. The empire declined after they were defeated by the Sikhs and driven out of the Indian subcontinent. However, the greatest factor influencing their decline may have been economic, as trade was cut off to China due to poor diplomatic relations, and the traffic along the ancient land trade routes connecting India, Iran, and Central Asia all but disappeared. This was due to the expansion of the Russian Empire into Central Asia and the dominance of the British East India Company over maritime trade, leaving Afghanistan in a more isolated state than it had been in over 2,000 years, but also a more unified one, with the majority of the country practicing the same religion, Sunni Islam, and the concept of a national Afghan identity became prevalent, regardless of tribal or ethnic affiliation. The Durrani were overthrown by Dost Muhammad Khan, who established the Emirate of Afghanistan. The British, who had largely gained control over India and its revenue, feared that the Russians would take Afghanistan and use it as a staging ground to take India from them. So to preempt the Russians, they invaded instead, and reinstalled the deposed Durrani king on the throne, who was widely disliked. After encountering minimal resistance to their conquest and occupation of the country, the British withdrew most of their troops back to India. The remaining British occupying force was then ambushed and was almost completely slaughtered as they attempted to retreat from the country. In an event that shocked Great Britain and the Western world, the Afghans then reinstated Dost Muhammad Khan on the throne of the country. Nearly 4 decades after the first invasion, the British invaded again. A peace was concluded after both sides suffered heavy casualties. Afghanistan became a British protectorate, with the Afghans maintaining complete self-rule, and the British handling their foreign affairs, which they didn't do too much of anyways. Namely, no cadoodling with the Ruskies. 40 years later, in a third Anglo-Afghan war, 120,000 Afghans invaded India. After a few brief clashes with the British, a treaty was made where Afghanistan would be internationally recognized as a fully independent state. A few years later, in 1926, the country was reformed into the Kingdom of Afghanistan and began the process of modernization and increased contacts with the outside world. In 1973, the monarchy was overthrown in a bloodless coup d'etat by the king's cousin, Mohammed Daoud Khan, who became the president of a single-party republic, who further sought to modernize the country and received aid from the Soviet Union and the United States, who both tried to curry influence over the country. In 1978, Daoud and many of his family members were assassinated during a communist coup d'etat, establishing the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. This Soviet-backed government pushed wide-ranging reforms that sought to modernize and abolish most traditional and religious societal structures. This caused widespread insurrection and Soviet involvement in a long war of attrition that nearly lasted 10 years, and caused millions of refugees to leave the country. A few years after the Soviet Union withdrew their forces, the Islamic State of Afghanistan overthrew the government and took over the cities, which was largely overthrown by the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan in 1996, which established a totalitarian rule. They were removed from power 5 years later, by U.S. coalition forces and the Northern Alliance, and established the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in 2004. Let me know in the comments of what you believe the future holds for Afghanistan. Also, let me know in the comments of what you found most interesting about Afghan history. This has been Epimetheus. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notifications whenever I make new content like this. And a big thanks to my patrons over on Patreon, who help make content like this possible.
Okay, so that was a whole history of Afghanistan without any commentary, but it's just yung history po ng buong country ng Afghanistan. Kita nyo po, pag may nakita kayo sa world map, you will see Afghanistan is really at the center in between all of these world powers throughout history. And in the modern sense, pinag-awayan in the 19th century lalo na, the 20th century, yung panahon na natin, pinag-awayan ng mga British, Russian, and other forces in the region. America also later on. So they, in the early 20th century, it was the British, pumasok yung mga imperial interests in Russia and all. And then later on in the 70s, America came in. So it's a whole history of Afghanistan and parang back and forth. So before we go into these things in detail, I'd like to ask, based on the history yung nakita natin, it's bordered by Iran, Pakistan, on top is the stands, yung mga Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and then Russia sa taas. So medyo sa gitna talaga tong Afghanistan. And it's a very mountainous region, sabi nga nila. Very mountainous. So it has a rich history, but a very troubled one. Go ahead, Chairman.
Wala, gusto lang idagdag. Medyo nakaka-nosebleed yung history. No? Dahil, but ang dapat natin maalala dito, itong Afghanistan is ancient talagang kanilang civilization. No? Yung Kabul, ang sinasabi doon, ang kanilang mga buildings doon at mga kung ano-anong structures, no? Were supposed to have been built by as early as 4,000 years ago. No? 4,000 years ago is 2000 BC. No? Kanya may kita mo marami talagang history to, no? At they started all the time with tribes and so on and so forth, pero maraming changes through the centuries, no? Kung ano yung nangyayari until this late period, nagkaroon na nga ng parang naging nation state ang Afghanistan when these different groups of people got together and formed themselves into a country, no? But why is it quite important? Kasi ang mundo pumunta sa what we call geopolitics. No? Ang geopolitics po, ito yung parang dahil may mga lumalaki na bansa na nagiging powerful katulad po ng Soviet Union, Russia, kanyan, bago splinter ang Soviet Union into Russia, may mga superpowers po ito no? Now you've got China, you've got UK, Japan, and several others. Now, what is geopolitics? Geopolitics is hatakan yan ng kakampi. No? Dati kasi ang naglalaban-laban ang Soviet Union, of which Russia was parang the lead, and the so-called free world, of which America was the lead. No? So, dahil meron parang silang Cold War, nagkaroon ng concept na geopolitics, meaning hatakan ng mga bansa na pwede mong maging kakampi. At ayusin yung mga resources na kakailanganin mo as a group of allied countries. Ganyan din kasi ang ginagawa plano ng Soviet Union. Nag-e-expand sila at gusto nilang mag-expand yung kanilang Soviet Union. And it was moving towards precisely what they had at that time was the Cold War. Kanya po medyo nahinto ng konti yon dahil nag-collapse po ang mga ekonomiya ng Soviet Union. Nauna pang nag-collapse yan kaysa dito sa bansang Amerika. Pero yung kanilang laro na geopolitics, naghahanap ng mga kakampi at kaalyado, hindi tumigil. Ang Amerika at saka UK, kakausapin itong mga kaalyado nila para sumama sa kanilang sistema. Ngayon, yung Russia at China, dahil dito sa recently nagagalaw na ito, parang na-isolate yung China and Russia. Dahil ang ginagawa po ng Amerika at saka Great Britain, inaano nila yung pine-pressure nila yung mga ibang bansa na makipag-alyado sa kanila para sila lang ang magiging pinakamalaking at pinakamalakas na superpower. No? We are at that stage now. So when a country like Afghanistan, huwag na natin masyadong pasukan yung kung sino-sino at kung ano-ano. But when a country as big as Afghanistan collapses, ang tendency niyan ng superpowers ay hahatakin nila towards themselves. Bakit binitiwan ng Amerika ang Afghanistan? Actually, hindi naman nila talagang binibitiwan. Kung nandyan si President Trump, ang ginagawa lang ni President Trump, unti-unti niyang aalisin ang military bases doon at mga equipment dahil napakalaking ginagastos ng Amerika dyan. At turuan nila yung maiiwan na Afghanistan government to continue their governance. No? Pero habang nagwi-withdraw at meron mga conditionalities na sinabi si Trump dyan sa mga Taliban, pagdating naman ni Biden, hindi na siguro sinundan yung schedule tsaka yung mga conditionalities na inilagay ni Trump. Kanya parang bumulusok ang pasok ng Taliban dito sa pag-take over ng Afghanistan. Pero balikan natin, ang sitwasyon na ganito, magulo. Sino ba ang makikinabang? Hindi po natin alam. Dahil ang Taliban, ano ba ang Taliban? Mga Taliban, mga ano yan, sekto ng mga Muslim, kanilang pag-aaral sa Sharia law ay medyo fundamentalist, no? At yun ang gusto nilang ibalik sa pagpapatakbo ng bansang Afghanistan. Dahil nung pumasok yung mga Amerikano, tinanggal nila itong pagsusunod dito sa Sharia law ng mga Muslim. At medyo binuksan nila at iniba nila ang interpretasyon ng Muslim culture dito sa Afghanistan. So dito pa lang magkakaroon na ng problema. Tapos yung hawak nilang bansa, iiwanan nila. Sino naman ang makikinabang? Dapat ang makinabang dyan ay ang bansang Afghanistan. whether they are run by Afghanis or they are run by the Taliban. Pero ang bansang yan ang dapat umasikaso ng kapakanan ng taong bayan nila dyan. In other words, they are a nation. Ang dapat sana, ang bansang Amerika tutulong dyan sa kanilang development para hindi babagsak, para hindi magkakaroon ng civil war, para hindi kukulapso ang ekonomiya nila at lahat-lahat ng ibang. Ang kaso, etong ang Amerikano na namumuno si Biden, ang nalalaman natin ngayon, maraming katangahan. No? At ito nga ngayon, pumapasok naman ang bansang Russia. Kumakausap din sa mga Taliban at ang marahil ang pinag-uusapan nila kung paano may aayos ng mabuti yung bansa. Tapos, pati na rin ang bansang China, nakikita niyo po yung isang border ng Afghanistan, nasa China yan. Kakausap na rin yan sa mga Taliban tungkol sa kanilang plano para sa bansa. Ito po ang isang magandang development kung sana matuloy. Bakit po maganda? Sana itong bansang Russia, bansang China, at bansang Amerika magkausap-usap sila at magtulungan dito sa evacuation ng mga refugees at mga foreigners from Afghanistan, lalong-lalo na yung mga natatakot sa parating na gera kung magkakaroon ng gera. Pangalawa, ang Afghanistan, nung panahon ng Amerikano, itong nakaraan 20 years, ay hindi talagang umunlad. Ang malaki lang na negosyo ng Afghanistan nung hinawakan ng Amerikano at saka ng United Kingdom, ng mga British, ay isang parte ng Northern Afghanistan na I think it's a total of 220,000 hectares of opium production. Yung pong opium, yan po yung pinaka-base na ginagamit sa production ng heroin. In these 20 years or so, Afghanistan, which is managed by the US and the British, were the suppliers and producers of 95% of the world's heroin production, or opium. 95% of the world's market hawak po nitong 220,000 hectares ng production ng opium na pinamumunuan ng Amerika at saka British. Isa sa mga kondisyon na pinag-usapan nila Trump, nalalaman natin ngayon sa Taliban kung papasok man sila, isa sa mga kondisyones ay bubuwagin nila itong mga opium production. At hindi natin alam kung totoong mabubuwag yan. Pero ito ang importanteng mangyari. Dahil ang ekonomiya ng Afghanistan ay nakasandal dito sa production ng opium. Kinakailangan kumpara sa security ng mundo, itong Russia, China, tsaka Amerika, at kasama na rin ng ibang mga bansa, magsama-sama para tulungan ang Afghanistan na maging developed economy. Tulungan sila sa mga industriya, tulungan sila sa mga educational system, agricultural system, infrastructure, water management, importante. All of that. Para ang Afghanistan hindi na magiging unstable as a country. At pag nangyari yan, marahil ganyan din ang gagawin nitong mga gobyernong ito para ma-develop yung mga karatig bansa, karatig bayan ng Afghanistan. So, sa bagay, mas mahirap, madaling sabihin, mahirap gawin. Pero sa palagay ko, ito ang direksyon na importante para dito sa isang sitwasyon na ito. Dahil may krisis ngayon. Ang krisis, siyempre, andyan yung mga refugees, nakikita nyo, nagsisiksikan sa airport, hanap ng paraan makatakas sila. At siyempre may mga mamamatay dyan, magkakasakit at lahat. No? Yan, tapos sigurado hunger will be setting in and there will be more chaos and probably an expansion into civil war. No? And chaos na dahil ang mga armas, sabi nila, nag-iwan daw ng mga armas ang bansang Amerika. Diyan hindi natin alam kung totoo yan o hindi. Pero sigurado meron pong mga naiwan dyan at magagamit po ng mga Taliban habang hinahunting nila yung mga dating Afghanis na galing sa dating gobyerno. Yan po ang kaguluhan at pag natuloy ang kaguluhan dyan, lalawak ang gulo niyan dito sa buong Middle East. At dahil lalawak yan, papasok na rin ang mga bansang kaalyado ng Afghanistan at ng Taliban. Ano yun? Nandyan yung mga Iran, for example, kasama na dyan. Yung Pakistan, kasama na dyan. Yung, Russia, kasama dyan sa mga alyado nila. Depende kung anong gagawin ng bansang Amerika. Di ba? Kanya magulo. Big question mark ang nangyayari ngayon. No? But dapat yung mga sane minds of leaders will do away with geopolitics and look for solutions that will benefit all of these populations. Because if you help develop the Middle East as a world, as a region, no, you will be able to establish peace in that area. And it will infect other areas so that they too will develop peace in their own respective regions. Katulad po dito sa atin. Yun ang aking lang isang comment dyan na wala tayong solusyon. Meron tayong mga alam na nangyari. Etong si Biden may ginagawa. Etong mga taong to nagproduce ng heroin, mga British, kaya. Pero sana, dahil alam na natin kung saan papunta yung ganyan, yung gera, sana meron mga ibang mga leader ng mga bansang ito na kabaligtaran ang gawin nila. instead of conflict, instead of fighting each other, they look for something that they can collaborate in. Kung pwede silang magtulungan, maski na unang-una dito sa pag-evacuate ng mga refugees, magtulong-tulungan ng Czech, ng Russia, ang Amerika, para ma-ialis, ma-evacuate yung mga libu-libong tao dyan. Pues let that be the first step of collaboration. Pangalawa, mag-collaborate sila kung paano silang tutulong sa mga iba-ibang kinakailangan na kabuhayan. No? And eventually, mag-e-expand yan into the development of Afghanistan as a nation. Sana ganyan lang. Ito lang po ang aking mga opinion and thinking about the crisis that we are facing in Afghanistan.
Right. And then, of course, actually, history po bears chairman out, because until and unless there is real development in the region, which includes Afghanistan, real economic development for its peoples, real infrastructure development, great projects that will raise the economic standard, hindi talaga, it will always be a war-torn region. It will always be subject to nations and individuals that want to take advantage of the chaos. So, I just wanted to add, na-mention nga ni Chairman kanina, ang hindi alam ng tao, ang kala po sa mainstream media, itong Taliban and other groups are the ones doing the drug trade. Pero sa aming matagal na pagsusuri, and with our friends at LaRouche, with the help of the LaRouche organization, we've shown that it's actually the bulk, yung karamihan po ng drug trade na opium, which is heroin trade, ay under areas controlled by the British and American forces, I guess NATO in that sense, since 2001. Okay? So, bibigyan ko lang kayo ng idea. Okay? Ang pinakamarami, itong Afghanistan, in 1994 to 2000, 80,000 hectares ang cultivated. Average of 80,000 hectares ang kinocultivate, ang ginagamit pang heroin, ang opium. In 2001, biglang bumaba ito to 8,000 hectares. Ito pong mga figures is from the UN. So, in 2017, itong 2001, nung pumasok, assuming itong the United Nations forces led by British and America, 8,000 hectares bumaba. In 2017, 16 years after the occupation, naging 330,000 hectares cultivated, okay, na heroin, opium. Okay? Ito during the tinatawag nilang war on terrorism. This is during that time. Malala po natin yung 2001, saan nangyari yung 9/11 po. Right? September 11, 2001. Okay. Since 2017, bumababa slowly yung hectarage. Yung 2019 numbers po, from 330,000 hectares, naging 163,000 hectares na lang. Marami pa po, pero bumababa na. Wala po tayong figures of 2020 and 2021 na nakala. Pero, according to the same report, yung total in 2019, ang opium na opium, yung pera galing sa opium ay $2.1 billion. Okay? Now, just to give you also an idea, isa pang malaking area na nag-cultivate po ng opium o nagtatanim ng opium plants ay ang Myanmar. Itong Myanmar, they have currently, 2019, 22,000 hectares for opium. And according to UN, it's $100 million a year na kinikita nila from opium. So total is 2.2 billion kung 95% ang kontrolado dyan sa Afghanistan ng combined forces of US and UN and Britain. That's about 2 billion. Palagay po namin maliit pa to. Siguro po ito yung nilabas sa yung raw product, hindi pa processed pang heroin. Pero yung mismong plant, mismong raw material sa harvest, siguro yun po yung $2 billion a year. Pero hindi pa yun yung presyo ng droga kasi alam natin po yung droga mahigit 100 times ang kinikita dyan. Trillions na po ang kinikita sa buong mundo ng droga. So just to give you an idea, and remember po yung Myanmar, ano po yung nangyari dyan recently rin sa Myanmar? Di ba nagka-kudeta ulit si Myanmar? Because it was a leading, one of the heads there, si Aung San Suu Kyi, was also installed and put together by Obama and Hillary. Suportado po nila yan. So this is just to give a perspective. And also, just part of the report, majority po ng mga farmers nito ay ginagamit yung pagplants ng opium para mabuhay. Kasi walang ibang produkto ang Afghanistan. Kasi sinira na po ang ekonomiya. Wala na pong ibang magawa. Tapos kontrolado na ng foreign powers yung nation nila. Most of the villages and most of yung mga farmers po, wala na ibang trabaho kundi magtanim ng opium para kumita, para mabuhay. And most of them are using that to live, to eat, to pay for daily wages, to pay for para sa doktor, medical, and all of that. Yan po ang that's what's happening po sa Afghanistan ngayon. So, again, number one, yung solusyon right away, yung solusyon yung instinct po ng KDP and because of our chairman, sabi po niya, kailangan i-stabilize yung country through nations like Russia and China, together with the United States, stabilize it para walang gulo. And then after that, dapat may long-term plan of infrastructure to develop the region. Kasi kung hindi po, pupunta po yan, babalik at babalik yan ulit sa droga. Para po nangyari dito sa atin, the more people, walang trabaho, walang droga ang lalapitan, pambenta, kahit konti lang, mas marami kinikita pa. Pero yun ang sumisira sa bansa. So those are just some numbers from Afghanistan. No? But we have if Chairman doesn't have any more comments on that, we have a video from our friend Harley Schlanger talking about ano ba nangyari 20 years na tayo nandun, ano ba yung proper perspective we can show that. Chairman, you want to say something before that?
Yes, tingnan natin sasabihin ni Harley Schlanger kasi totoo yun, after 20 years of American occupation, no, what has Afghanistan developed? No? Did they develop an agro-industrial program? Are there agricultural? Can they sustain themselves? Are they planting their own food and their own sustenance? No, yun ang importante din dyan. No, At tingnan natin, ano ba talagang ginawa ng mga Amerikano noon doon? No? Yan, sila, naumpisahan yan, nila George Bush, sila
Tinuloy ni Clinton,
tapos
Obama.
tinuloy nila Obama, no?
Yeah.
Tapos hanggang 2016,
Yeah.
nung pagpasok ni Trump, nakita niya na ganitong palang nangyayari, nag-decide siya, babawasan niya ang mga American bases, no? Pero alam niya, magkakagulo pag bigla-biglang hatakin mo. Kanya, nagsaset na siya ng mahusay na programa para unti-unti niyang maalis yung American bases. Pero what has it done in that area for development? Yan ang magandang pakinggan natin kay Harley Slang.
All right, so we go to Harley Schlanger. Again, remember po yung 2001 until today, yun yung sinasabi nating war on terror. Yan yung sinasabi nila. Okay, after 9/11. Okay, please play the video.
Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily update for August 17th, 2021. The topic today is going to be what lessons have we learned from the 20-year debacle in Afghanistan. I want to begin with something which was just released a couple days ago, the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction report, which found that the policy of the U.S. toward Afghanistan involved, quote, incoherent strategies, unsustainable institutions, fundamental lack of understanding of Afghanistan's social, economic, and political context, unquote, just for starters. Now, what we saw yesterday with President Biden's statement, there were some elements of what he said that were true, but there was also a lot of disingenuousness because he had supported the Afghan war. Remember, under the Obama administration, there was a surge. Biden never spoke out against that, at least publicly. But he was right when he said it would be wrong to order U.S. troops today into Afghanistan to step up when the Afghanistan forces will not. Well, how did we get to this point? And I think we should start with what Helga Zepp-LaRouche had to say in her comments on this. She said this should be the end of a system of regime change wars. These wars did not serve the interests of the United States, either the security interests or the economic interests, and they certainly didn't serve the interests of the countries we invaded. And she included in that Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Libya. The question that's posed now is not to point the fingers, because there's a lot of blame that goes around. I think the one person who got it right, which is somewhat ironic, because he's with the CIA, which was involved in a lot of the false estimates. But former acting director of the CIA, Michael Morrell, tweeted, he said, what happened is not the result of an intelligence failure. It is the result of numerous policy failures for multiple administrations. So let's look at what the solution would be first, and then we can come back to what the lessons are. Now, what do you do now? Just walk away? Leave the country to disintegrate? Rely on the pledges of the Taliban that there won't be retribution? Well, the Chinese are offering a perspective which was presented at a Schiller Institute conference on July 31st on the topic of will the Afghanistan war, the Afghanistan situation lead to a new paradigm? Now, what we discussed at that was that the solution in a situation like this is cooperation of neighbors for economic development. That is, to go in and connect Afghanistan to the rest of the world. The Chinese are offering to do that with the Belt and Road Initiative. And we should join hands with them. We should join hands with any of the neighbors, including India, Pakistan, Russia, Uzbekistan, Iran, other countries in that area who are saying that they would like to participate in a successful development perspective for Afghanistan. Now, China said they will aid in the development of Afghanistan through the extension of the Belt and Road Initiative with three conditions. And those are the Taliban must cut all ties with terrorists, extremists, and separatists. If they do that, that is, if they don't let Afghanistan become a haven for operations not just against the United States, but against other nations in the region, if they do that, then China is willing to connect Afghanistan through the Pakistan-China economic corridor. It would become a transshipment center, logistics center between the eastern part of Asia and Central Asia, Southwest Asia, and even to Europe. Now, that's the way we have to go, and the Executive Intelligence Review has put out a special report that discusses this. Will Afghanistan trigger a paradigm change? And this, as I said, was the subject of our July 31st conference on the question of what's next in Afghanistan. Now, on this question of an intelligence failure, the delusion that U.S. trained troops would fight, the question is, what were they fighting for? The U.S. intent in Afghanistan was never to build a democratic industrial nation. It was part of a geopolitical strategy. We did not have an approach to it like we did with Japan after World War II or South Korea after the Korean War, where we spent significant amounts of money, but also brought in personnel who developed the transportation systems, the power systems, revitalized the industries that had been destroyed. Instead, we went into Afghanistan to engage in geopolitics. Our first intervention into Afghanistan was in the 1980s, when the decision was made that we would try to turn Afghanistan into the Soviet Union's Vietnam. And to do that, who did we arm? We armed the Taliban. We armed the bin Laden networks that became the Al-Qaeda, the same networks that have attacked us internationally. We armed and trained them. And once they drove the Soviets out, we turned our backs on the country and let Taliban go in and form a government, which is why we ended up invading after 9/11 in 2001. We did nothing to help overcome the nation's underdevelopment. Now, you can't overcome underdevelopment with money. If you just pour money into existing structures, what you get is corruption. We have evidence of that all over the world, that the people who become the government look to the United States. Maybe they'll build a few things, but they're looking to the United States to get the money. So you have to instead fight for a development perspective. And that's what we have presented in our reporting. Now, why do we say it was geopolitics, British geopolitics in particular, that failed? Well, it's good that we can say that now and see it, because that's what has to end if we're going to end this era of constant warfare, constant geopolitical confrontation, and so on. So the lessons from Afghanistan must be no more geopolitics. And by geopolitics, it means using regions of the world, nations of the world, and peoples of the world as proxy battlefields between the British and the US and NATO versus supposedly the adversarial powers, in this case primarily Russia and China. Now, the lesson then is no geopolitics, no regime change wars. How do you know you're imposing a government which is going to be popular, which is going to do what's necessary? You don't. That has to be the choice not of the great powers, but of the people who live in that country. And third, you should extend a hand of cooperation for economic development, because that's the way you build trust. That's the way you overcome the tensions and the hostility, the suspicions that exist when a country comes in and says, oh, we're here to help you. Now, here's one of the ironies of the situation. I think one of the most profound ironies. The fall of Kabul occurred exactly 50 years to the day after President Nixon moved on August 15, 1971, to start the process that ended the Bretton Woods system, ended the fixed exchange system, and set up a global system of free trade, deregulated economies, no fixed exchange rate. It created a neo-colonial world, a system which was used to justify great power military intervention. And what did the military intervention do? enforce attacks against sovereign nations. Sovereign nations that decided to act against the International Monetary Fund, against the international banking community to defend their people and their nation, those are the countries we attacked. Look at Iraq, look at Libya. Countries that were making progress toward development programs to take care of their people, a healthcare system, education system, water management, transportation. These are the countries that were attacked because they no longer were willing to submit to the arbitrary rules of a so-called rules-based order. And so that's why these regime change wars have been carried out. You either submit to the rules-based order or there will be regime change. So has the debacle of 20 years in Afghanistan taught us that? Well, if you look at the media and listen to most politicians, the answer is no. Republicans are using this to attack Biden, as though Biden set the conditions here. Biden, for his own part, is then attacking Trump. Now, Trump tried to do the right thing, but he didn't succeed. And now he's turning around saying Biden screwed it up. Well, Trump was right to say we should get out of these wars, but he was unable to overcome the power of those entrenched forces of the military-industrial complex, which kept us in those wars. He wanted to extend the U.S. hand to cooperation, economic development cooperation with Russia and China, but that was stopped by the deep state. And so far, if you listen to people like Blinken and Jake Sullivan and the Defense Secretary Austin, it appears as though Biden is going to follow the same rules-based order, the same geopolitical doctrine, which has gotten us into these wars, these endless wars. So it's time that we learn this lesson. And I would urge people, go look at the discussion, the dialogue that took place at the July 31st conference of the Schiller Institute. It's archived, you can see it. It will show you that there are people from all over the world who are willing to sit down and talk about how to overcome the geopolitical confrontations, which we take as a natural condition in the world. It's not natural. It's the result of the destruction of the very ideas of our constitutional tradition, destruction of the philosophical outlook of the founding fathers, as expressed by John Quincy Adams, who said we should not go abroad to seek monsters to fight. Instead, we have to work with other countries for a mutual development. And that should be the lesson, at least the first lesson, we take from the situation in Afghanistan. Probably this Saturday, we'll have a follow-up to that July 31st conference. So watch this site for details of that. And thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you again tomorrow.
Okay, so that was our friend Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization, and giving his thoughts about what a debacle, ang tinatawag nilang debacle, parang grabe yung nagawa dun sa Afghanistan, and no simple pouring in of money. Hindi pwedeng paulanan lang ng pera yan para mas hindi matatapos yung problema dyan. So, your thoughts, Chairman? I think you're muted, Chairman. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. No, I'm just happy that basically the thoughts that Harley Schlanger was presenting were mostly also in accordance with what we were just talking about, no? As to what type of approach we should have in relation to the development of Afghanistan, no? And use Afghanistan as an issue that may actually develop the whole region. Now, and I'm not surprised that is what he was saying, because this is what LaRouche would have said and directed this. No? As a matter of fact, this has been what LaRouche has always been saying, as to veer away from geopolitics. Remember, the geopolitics means regime changes and trying to get as many allies to your side, no? Parang sinong dapat kakampi natin? Amerika o China, no? Dito na ako sa Amerika dahil marami akong kamag-anak dun eh. Yung mga ganyan, it's crazy, no? Because we're really talking about our lives, and we're really talking about it not as to who we should side with, no? We must look for a way that all of us develop and all of us improve in our quality of life, assuring that the succeeding generations will also benefit from it. No? Itong direksyon na itong napaka-importante at hindi pa lumalabas dito sa mga pinag-uusapan ng mga iba-ibang mga bansa. By the way, tayo, the Philippines, even if we are a small country, we should not keep quiet about what is going on there. We should have an opinion. And our opinion, as expressed, let's say, by the Secretary of Foreign Affairs after consulting with the President, our opinion should be voiced out to the rest of the world. No? And proposals for such a thing should be made. Example, itong nangyayari sa Afghanistan, I think is worthy of convening the foreign affairs secretaries and ministers of the ASEAN nations, no? And discussing the different steps that we can take as ASEAN in participating in the development of the Middle East, no? Hindi natin pwedeng sasabihin wala tayong pakialam diyan, no? At lahat tayo dapat may pakialam sa mga nangyayari sa buong mundo because it affects us. At natuwa naman ako kanina, si Harley Slanger reminded us about August 15, 1971. Kasi itong araw na ito ay ang araw na ang Amerika nag-withdraw from the Bretton Woods Agreement. The Bretton Woods Agreement po is a system, is an agreement, economic development agreement, which included the financial system, which was based on fixed exchange rates. Hindi po itong floating exchange rates na ngayon. Dati po, noong mga 1945 up to 1971, we were on a system of fixed exchange rates. At ang patakbo po ng mga ekonomiya doon, bagamat hindi masyadong perfecto, ay mas maganda di hamak kisa ngayon nung binuwag nila ang Bretton Woods Agreement at pinalit nila sa floating exchange rates. Ang palitan po ng pera noon nakapako sa 3 pesos to $1 yung atin. Yan ang tawag na fixed exchange rate. Anong ibig po sabihin yan? Ibig sabihin yan na kung may utang kang $1, kailangan mong kumuha ng 3 piso para makabayad ka ng $1 sa utang mo. 3 piso lang po. Binuwag nila itong sistemang fixed exchange rate at ang pinalit nila floating exchange rate. Ano pong nangyari dyan sa floating exchange rate? Ano po ang palitan ngayon? 50 pesos kada isang dolyar. Anong ibig sabihin yan? Kung may utang kang $1, kinakailangan maghanap ka ng 50 pesos para mabayaran mo yung $1. At saan mo kukunin yung 50 pesos? Eh di sa taong bayan, itataas mo yung buwis. Yung isa pa, magbenta ka ng mga ari-arian ng gobyerno, mag-privatize ka, no? Katulad ng ginagawa ng para yung ari-arian ng gobyerno, may papalit mo ng pera para bumili ka ng dollar para bayaran yung utang mo. Dati, kung wala yung floating exchange rate, yung utang natin na $1, ang kailangan mo lang hanapin, 3 piso. Ngayon, nahanapin natin 50 pesos para bayaran parehong $1. Yan pong sistemang yan ay ipinairal po ng IMF noong August 15, 1971 nung binuwag nila yung kasunduan ng mundo noon called the Bretton Woods Agreement. Dito sa nangyayari ngayon, ang parang sinasuggest ni Harley Schlanger kanina, ang mga pangyayari ngayon ay hindi po malayong isipin na itong ginagawa nilang ay sadya para magkaroon ng isang sitwasyon na gagawa ng panibagong sistema sa pananalapi at sa mga ekonomiya, no? Para manatili ang hawak sa atin ng mga malalaking korporasyon, mga malalaking bangko, no? At ang mga iba pang mga pagsasama katulad ng deep state at mga Illuminati at mga kabal. Yan po, no? ang nakakatakot, baka dyan tayo papunta. Wag natin papayagan pumunta dyan. Balik po tayo dito sa anong magagawa ng Pilipinas. Yan po, umpisahan natin ang diagulo kung ano ang tulong ang magagawa natin sa kaunlaran ng Afghanistan. At magkakaroon din tayo ng panahon na ang iba-ibang mga bansa mag-uusap-usap para mahanapan ng solusyon ang pagbagsak ng mga ekonomiya ng mga iba-ibang bansa dahil dito sa mga krisis na ito. No? Pati na rin, kasama na rin dyan ang ating ekonomiya sa Pilipinas. Yun lang gusto ko idagdag ito.
I have a question. Meron akong tanong, Chairman. You said before, quoting, I forget what Pope, but sabi niya, the development is the new word for peace.
Yes.
Now, in the Philippine context, dito sa atin po, nasabi mo na yung iba, pero in terms of yung buong bansa po natin, nakikita na po natin that there's always been quote-unquote terrorists in Mindanao, sa Sulu, yung mga ganon. In the context of that statement, And nakikita pumapasok at labas yung mga droga na madali kasi wala tayong pandepensa, wala tayong, our borders are not secure, kumbaga. And as long as there is no development and more of our people, our OFWs, yung mga OFW natin, yung mga tao natin sa Mindanao, sa mga remote regions, minsan, syempre, kailangan nila mabuhay. So, kumakapit rin sila tulad ng mga nangyayari sa Afghanistan. Dito sa yung mga hindi ka nais-nais na mga bagay tulad ng pagbebenta ng droga at pagkano. So, in that context, I remember, naalala ko, Chairman, you had part of our blueprint for national development was a real sincere development of the region of Mindanao. Pwede bang you take us through that concept of a circular rail system and powered by... Sige po.
Well, dati pa, years ago, as early as 1990s, no? At nalalaman natin at patuloy pa rin ang problema dito sa lugar natin sa Mindanao at patuloy rin ang patayan, ang panggigera sa mga Muslim at ganyan. Tapos ang sabi ko noon, ang walang solusyon dito sa ang Mindanao, hindi mo malulutas ng military solution, no? Hindi mo pwedeng bobombahin lang ang mga kampo ng mga Muslim katulad ng ginawa natin, binomba yung mga kampo ng Abu Bakar. Tapos, panalo na tayo, victory na. Ay, hindi po ganyan. No? Hindi ganyan, hindi mo matatalo ang kaisipan. Pwede mong patayin yung tao. Pero ang kaisipan, lalong-lalo na kanilang galit o kanilang hinanakit, hindi mawawala. No? Lalala pa nga pag binobomba mo sila. No? Ang solusyon sa Mindanao at that time was, sabi ko, infrastructure development. Ang dapat siguro, sabi ko, gumawa ng railway system na paikot sa buong Mindanao and criss-crossing Mindanao. Yung sa mga perimeter ng Mindanao, dadaan sa mga ports, yung mga anuhan ng mga vapor kung saan dadaan doon ang railway. Iikot yan buong Mindanao. Tapos lalagyan mo din ng magki-criss-cross na railway system. Why? This will facilitate the transfer of goods from certain areas of production to the port areas where they can be loaded and shipped to different islands of the Philippines. Not only that, it will also facilitate transportation, land transportation of the peoples of Mindanao so that they will be crisscrossing. Now, when you have to do this, you will need electrical
power,
ample of electricity. Kasi
ample supply.
Ample supply. Kasi kung lalagyan mo ng gasolina yan o diesel, masyadong mahal. So kinakailangan magtayo ka ng power generation systems. At dati, sabi ko, meron ka ng Maria Cristina Falls dyan sa Mindanao. Pwede ka din magtayo pa ng iba pang hydroelectric power plants dyan sa region. Hanapin mo yung mga ilog na malalaki, magtayo ka ng mga dams that will create power. This was in 1990s. No? Ngayon, it is the same solution na lang, imbes na hydroelectric, gamitan na natin ng nuclear power plants. No? Siyempre, economic development will always translate into peace. Si Pope Paul VI, yan ang sinabi. Peace is another name for development. No? At ako'y naniniwala dyan sa ganyan. Kung may development, wala pong gera dahil wala pong nagugutom. No? Pero sa atin sa KDP, in-expand natin yan ethos, no? Sinasabi natin, ang pamamahala ng ating gobyerno ay dapat nakabase sa katotohanan. Kung ang ating pamamahala ay puro kasinungalingan, panluloko, gagamit tayo ng paraan para manipulate ang pag-iisip ng tao, wala pong mangyayari sa ating bansa. Kung ang base natin ay ang katotohanan at walang manipulasyon sa pag-iisip, magkakaroon ng justice. Justice cannot be based on lies. It has to be based on truth. At yung justice system natin, matindi at magiging poste, no? Poste ng ating demokrasya. Parang tawag dito yung halige o poste, no? Ng ating demokrasya. So you now have truth, or what's that? Katotohanan. Then you have justice, kasi magkasama yan dalawang yan, sigurado. Justice, ano yun? Katarungan. Kung mayroong katarungan sa ating lipunan, doon magkakaroon ka ng peace. Anong peace? Kapayapaan. Di ba? So kapayapaan, dahil meron kang katarungan, may katarungan ka dahil may pinagbabasihan na katotohanan. Ngayon, kung meron ka ng kapayapaan, yan ang kondisyon para sa development. No? Ano yung development? Kaunlaran. So, ano yung sinasabi natin? Ang una, katotohanan, tapos katarungan, pagkatapos kapayapaan, pagkatapos ay kaunlaran. Itong apat na konseptong to, bagamat iba-iba, no, ay hindi mo pwedeng ipaghiwalay. No? You cannot separate these concepts because in justice, it must be based on truth, and there will only be peace if there is justice, and there can only be development if there is peace. So they are all interconnected ideas. Iyan ang sinasabi natin sa KDP.
Right. So in the context of ano nangyari sa Afghanistan, nakita po natin yung about 15 minutes worth of Afghan history, ancient and parati po silang kasi sa gitna sila, and as long as there's no economic development, parang nagagamit yung kanilang tao and population for the foreign powers, and that prevents them from hindi sila makaangat, hindi sila makagalaw, hindi sila makadesisyon ng pansarili. So in terms of tayo po, nakikita po natin na medyo pag yung mga areas po, I remember po 20 years ago, war on Mindanao, di ba? Di ba, Chairman? Yung war on Abu Sayyaf and yung gera po, kailangan ng armas. Kailangan gastusin ng armas, kailangan mag-import tayo. So as long as may gera, kailangan gumastos, number one, sa armas. Number two, pag may gera sa isang rehiyon, walang parang organized. Hindi sila organized, medyo magulo. Pag may gulo, madaling makapasok yung mga droga, madaling makapasok yung mga illegal na bagay na hindi nakikita ng ating national government. So my thrust was to say, tama yung sinasabi natin na dati pa, matagal na po natin sinasabi. Matagal na may blueprint po ang KDP. Ang KDP lang po ay may blueprint sa atin ang buong development ng Pilipinas, and it's a 50-year development plan po, which includes rail, energy, and everything else. Agriculture, energy, agriculture, infrastructure, lahat na po. And yung ating kababayan na 27 million people in the island of Mindanao, in the region of Mindanao. 27 million people sa Visayas, around 20 million. And the rest in NCR. Pero and the rest in Luzon. Pero yung Mindanao po, 27 million. And ang rehiyon na po yan, napaka-underdeveloped. And the danger po, please correct me, Chairman, if I'm wrong, but the danger of non-development, it will become a narco state. Tama ba ako, sir? Nakamute ka po.
Well, from certain definitions, we already are a narco state. No? We don't seem to realize the magnitude of the drugs, not of the drugs that we use, but the drugs that we seem to be exporting. Because if you look at the number of shabu manufacturing setups all over the country, we definitely are producing much more shabu than the Philippine population can consume. We are producing as if though the whole twice the population of the Philippines are already in shabu. Can you imagine that? But it is not correct because we're only supposed to be 4 or 5 million addicts in users in the country. Now, where is the excess production going? What happens to the excess production? We are exporting them by different means. Does the government know about this? I am almost certain that people like Ben Jokno in Central Bank, people like Carl Chua, people like Dominguez, and even the president himself, I am almost certain that they know that we are exporting shabu. And the entry of this is, since, why are they quiet? Because the entry of this is in dollars. No? The sales of this is in dollars. And it
so GDP.
It helps in our fiscal situation. No? I have a feeling, I don't have the proof, ang ginagamit ko lang yung reason. No? Bakit napakalaki ng production natin ng shabu, pero ang gumagamit 5 million lang. No?
Tama.
Kasi kung ito-total mo yung mga hinuhuli nilang shabu production, aabot yung production mo parang 200 million ang gumagamit. 100 million lang tayo. That's 100%. So 200 is 200%. So where is it going?
Right.
This is what I think is happening.
Right. And this was during President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, di ba? Sabi niya, we are the number one transshipment point of drugs in the world.
Yeah.
That's what at that time. So
originally we were the transshipment, no? As a matter of fact, itong National Treasurer ng Liberal Party nung tumakbo si Noynoy Aquino, yung National Treasurer nila, I forgot his name, was a former governor of Quezon. No?
This is a National Treasurer of LP.
Of LP. No?
Right, yung namatay.
Namatay siya nung kasi dun sa election, natalo siya. Galit na galit siya, biro mo National Treasurer ka, ba't ka matatalo? Siguro may ginawang magic sila Noynoy na huwag papanalunin ito dahil drug lord. Di ko alam. Ano lang yan, haka-haka. No?
Tsaka kasi napaka-mysterious yung pagkamatay. So, syempre, you can't help but...
yeah, but this is already happening. And sana we have a more truthful government and more determined. But it needs a lot of moral courage to fight this. No? Malaking problema to. But you need a special kind of leader na hindi matatakot na harapin. At hindi siya matatakot harapin dahil naniniwala siya na 100 milyon na Pilipino ay nakasama niya. Kung minsan, itong mga politiko natin ayaw maniwala na susuportahan sila ng tao. Bakit? Kasi karamihan nitong mga politikong to na iluklok nilang sarili nila sa gobyerno dahil sa dayaan. So ang nasa loob nila ay hindi naman talagang susuportahan siya ng tao. No? Yan ang siguro naiisip nila. No?
Yes, so yun na nga. So again guys, salamat sa pakinig. This is the Afghanistan situation. Marami pa pong lalabas dyan in the coming days and weeks. Makikita po natin ano talaga yung nangyari dyan and what the effects are and kung sino talaga ano talaga ang ginagawa nila. But again, paalala po natin, Afghanistan has became the number one opium producer sa mundo. And 95% of that came about nung nag-occupy ang US and British and Western forces doon sa rehiyon. Okay? So dapat maalala po natin yan. Madali pong mag-research on it sa Google. Nandiyan po yung mga reports ng UN. Pero base sa amin, that's very mababa po pa rin yung number na yan na 2 billion a year ang kinikita dyan sa Afghanistan pa lang. So, mababa.
Siguradong understated yan, Itos.
Right.
300,000 hectares of poppy production, opium production. No?
Right.
That is very, very big. No?
Very big. And it might be brought into Afghanistan, but the heroin to be processed in different parts of the world. So siguro kinakount lang nila yung pagbenta ng mismong poppy. Hindi ko alam, pero, di ba?
Yeah,
could be that. Diba?
It could be that. It could be. Iba yan sa cocaine. Yung cocaine galing sa coca leaves. No? Itong heroin galing sa opium na galing sa poppy. No? Yung poppy is like a flower. No? na pag nakuha mo yung mga ingredients sa loob, yun ang ginagamit na opium. If opium kasi is used as a parang painkiller, yung mga ganyan. Yung mga Demerol, for example, Demerol, no, is opium-based. Tapos, pero pag lulutuin mo pa yan, nagiging siyang heroin. Ito yung mga sinisinghot o kaya ini-inject nitong mga addicts na ito. No?
Right.
Yan lang now, 300,000 hectares, I wonder how big that is.
According to 2017 numbers po yan. Pasok ni Trump, and then the next year, 330,000 hectares na. Biglang nag-spike siya. Tapos, 2018, 2019, papuntang pababa. So, 100, nag-half siya. The next, by 2019, half na siya. So, I don't know kung ano yung ngayon. But interesting also sa Myanmar, which is the Central Asia yung Afghanistan. Pero Myanmar, 22,000 hectares. How big is that?
That's why. That's about 1/10 of what they have in Afghanistan. So, alam mo, just to give you an idea, yung Hacienda Luisita is supposed to be 5,000 hectares. Ang laki-laki ng Hacienda Luisita. You multiply that by 60 times. No, you multiply 5 times. You multiply that by 60 times. That's how big before the opium production was in Afghanistan. How big is that? Actually, 60 times that will cover the whole of Tarlac, no? Pampanga, and even Bataan. No? Ganyang kalaki ang heroin production, poppy production ng Afghanistan. But importante sana, at sana wag po kayong magsasawa sa aming pagsisiwalat ng mga ganitong klaseng mga subjects, no? At pilitin niyo po sanang maintindihan at magtanong kayo sa sa inyong mga komento para malaman niyo po. Huwag kayong matatamad o maiinis na napakabigat ng pinag-uusapan natin. Bakit po ba? Dahil buhay natin to. Pinipilit po natin mapaliwanag sa inyo. Hindi para sabihin marami kaming alam. Hindi po yun. Wala kami. Ang gusto po namin, maintindihan ninyo ang naiintindihan namin. Para maayos po ang ating pagharap sa mga iba-ibang suliranin na dumadating po sa ating sariling buhay at sa ating sariling bansa. No?
Yeah.
So that you can understand what is going on. And we are not limited to superficial things, yung napakasimpleng mga issues.
Issue.
Dahil may mas malalim pa po dapat tayong pag-uunawa. Para nakikita po natin, maiintindihan po natin kung sino po ang mga tunay na kalaban ng ating bansa. Kung hindi po tayo ganito at magte-train, isasanayin ang sarili natin makapag-isip ng mga importanteng bagay na ganito, napakadali po tayong lokohin ng mga ating liderato. Yung kanilang mga kasinungalingan lumulusot, pinaniniwalaan natin. Tapos yung kanilang pananakot, umuubra. Bakit po? Bakit uubra yung pananakot nila? Kasi mangmang tayo eh. Hindi natin alam ang katotohanan, ginawa nila tayong mangmang, so kayang-kaya nila tayong takutin. Pag natakot kayo, ayan, hindi, para kayong mga baka na dinadala sa katayan. Di po ba? You are like human cattle being brought to the slaughterhouse without complaining. Nung pala, papatayin na tayo. This is why we are taking all of these steps. Alam namin, medyo meron po sa inyong baka ma-turn off, masyadong mabigat ang pinag-uusapan, mas gusto nyo yung medyo mababaw lang. Okay lang yun, kakayanin din natin yun. Pero kung minsan, bigyan niyo po kami ng pagkakataon na maibigay itong sa aming palagay mga importanteng kaalaman para sa ating pong lahat ito.
Tama. And before we read the messages, baka pwede natin pag-usapan rin yung Opium Wars. Chairman, in China and Hong Kong and all of that next time, di ba? Kasi jumping off from that. Also, just to add to, dagdag lang sa sinabi ni Chairman. Alam niyo po, napansin niyo po na medyo yung mga topic natin, we are choosing certain topics na ipaliwanag sa inyo. At namimili po talaga kami, nagde-decide kung ano yung maganda. Kasi ang mga topic minsan, nagiging po sensitibo sa ating mga kaibigan sa Facebook tsaka sa YouTube. Pag alam nyo na yung mga dinidiscuss po namin dito, kahit minsan pag gusto natin maisaliwalat yung katotohanan, medyo maraming nagagalit. So,
yung mga fact checkers ng Facebook tsaka ng YouTube, no? Palagi po kaming sinususpinde. Maski na umiiwas na nga kami dito sa dediretsuhin namin. Pero maski na ilabas namin ang mga lumalabas sa mga ibang mainstream media, lumalabas sa CNN, lumalabas sa DZRH. Pag linabas namin, tayo yung sinususpend ang ating pong Facebook tsaka yung YouTube. No? Mukhang mainit ang tingin sa atin nitong mga nasa Facebook at YouTube. Hindi ko lang alam kung meron mga kakilala dyan ng ating gobyerno na pinapabantayan po tayo. Pero ang ginagawa po natin, dahil marami naman paraan para maisiwalat ang katotohanan, iiwas muna tayo dyan, no? Dito sa mga controversial na topics dahil alam niyo na po naman kung anong nangyayari. At bibigyan po natin, magkakaroon po tayo ng pagkakataon magpahiwatig ng mga iba-ibang mga subjects na may may benepisyo naman sa ating lahat.
Yeah, correct. Okay. With that, Roxanne, let us go to the text messages. Ang text messages po natin, babasahin natin ng buo in the interest of free speech. Kasi meron tayo dyan sa Constitution na free speech, freedom of speech, di ba? Facebook at YouTube. Pero does not necessarily reflect that of the Katipunan and the show. Okay, let's start off with Ka-RJ Avellana. Mabuhay po. Mabuhay sa inyo, RJ. Freddy Oredina, present. Quote, the Islamic Emirate does not want women to be victims. Unquote. The Taliban has urged women to join its government as Enamula Samangani, a member of Taliban's Culture Commission, made the first comments on government. As a member of Taliban's Cultural Commission, made the first comments on governance across the country. At sinabi rin nila, hindi ko sinasabing mababait talaga tong lahat ng Taliban. Pero ang first announcement nila, titigilan nila yung yung mga plantation sa opium. Sinabi rin nila yun, titigilan po nila, aalisin po nila. The problem is, what do you replace it with? Yan ang challenge ngayon. Para bigyan ng kabuhayan mga tao. Okay, next. Aba Kylie Ru, good evening, KDP watching from Okinawa, Japan. More power, mabuhay, God bless. The quote is, quote, the more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws, by Tacitus. And quote, to learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize. Yan, tama, galing kay Voltaire. Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. May business kasi dyan, Afghanistan na opium, 94% supply in the whole world. Correct? Okay. Rudy Rabe, good evening, Prof. Butch, Valdes, and Cerritos. Roxanne Cervantes, good evening po. Tonitsky Malyorski, good evening po, Sir Butch Valdes. Wilfredo Opiniano, nanonood po ka, Butch. Elizabeth Mortel, good evening, Sir Butch from QC. Gandang gabi po sa inyo, Sir Itos. Good evening. Emma Mendoza, mabuhay po ang ating Katipunan. Sylvia I. and Diane. Hello, Katipunan, watching from New York State. Malakas ang ulan and ingat po kami and sa inyo as always. Yes, mag-ingat kayo dyan sa New York. Filemon De Vera, good evening, Sir Butch and Itos Valdes, watching from Muntinlupa. Angela Bolivar, hi po, gandang gabi. Basta ako, money pa din. Kami rin. Bienvenido ta, hallelujah, to God be the glory. Lourdes Nakajima, tuwang-tuwa yung mga DDS at talo si Pacman. Julie Mar Limansag, Pacquiao is a great fighter of all time. Correct. Alam nyo, mga taong hunyago, mga taong plastic. Basta dihado ka na sa tingin nila, hindi ka na suportado sa kanila. Pero kung papakinabangan kanila, so suportahan kanila. Pero rematch yan. Ang gusto ko, mahimo, naglaro si Ugas, yakap, below the bill pa. Tama. Maria Teresa Corpus Balburias. Good evening, Sir Butch, Saritas. The night of history, the lesson is on again. From Cebu City. God bless you po, mga sirs. Federico Manang, good evening po sa inyo, watching from Lipa. Naging slaves pa sila sa sarili nilang bansa. Yun na nga. Ronald Nanoy. Good evening po, Sir Butch and Sir Itos. At sa lahat ng mga taga-subaybay, mabuhay ang KDP. God bless, watching here from Santo Tomas, Batangas. Meli Lanon Flores, good evening mga sirs. Baka may kasamang Taliban. Rodel Noel Quijada, Lipay ang mga Duterte. Teodoro Valencia, watching. Nolibor Romoron Jimmy, watching from Laguna. Delphine Biguel, natatakot dahil wala namang maasahan sa gobyernong ito. Paano ang US? Bahala na si Batman. Sana gera na kaysa sa pandemya. Kung depopulation ang balak nila, mainam pang magkagera na kaysa sa nagkahirap mga tao na walang kalaban-laban. Bederio Candido Joselito, magandang gabi po sa inyo, Sir Butch Cedos. Mabuhay po ang Katipunan. God bless. Watching from Riyadh, KSA. Melchor Emilio, good evening sa KDP at Sir Butch at Sir Cedos. Watching from Las Piñas. Beatriz Venezuela, we're watching. Okay. Nicanor Gatchalian, good evening, KDP. God bless po. Jose Perez, opo, kayang-kaya pulbusin ng kano ang mga Taliban. But Biden administration left the country into shambles intentionally. Napakalapit ng Pakistan, US base nila para pakawalan ng foot soldier at mga military armaments nila doon. Pero ayaw nila gawin. Lolita Reyes, sir, watching. Alfredo Redina, Afghanistan is part of Old Silk Road, the graveyard of empires. Raf XB, good evening. Joven Espiritu, watching from Ilocos Norte. Joyce Pachao, mga DDS, kasi tingin nila kay Digong hindi nagkakamali. Kaya kahit may corruption sa administration nila, hindi sila naniniwala. Si Duterte, sunod-sunuran kay Duque. Galit pa sa mga ayaw magpapakuna. Cerezade Alonso, good evening. Di pa talaga hinog si Manny as politician. Good evening po, father and son, KDP team. Teodora Berino. Magandang gabi po ang ating katipunan. Al Santillan of Gising Maharlika. Mabuhay ang katipunan. Mabuhay ka Al. Cherry Lip. Good evening po sa inyo mga sir. Mabuhay po kayo. Glenn Resurrection watching. Emmanuel Razalo. Good evening Sir Butcheritos watching from Green Hills. Zenea Arcilia. Good evening Sir Butcheritos listening from Hong Kong. God bless you both. Mau Ramos, you are right sir. Ray Isagire, napakalaga ng territory sa capitalism sa production. Private property, territory, keep secure to maintain smooth production. Rolly Pingal Odtohan, mabuhay KDP. Victorianos, mabuhay po. Frater Patrick Christian Ong I. Good evening, Professor Butch Valdes with his son Itos Valdes of Philippine LaRouche Society. May God be blessed your blogging and KDP movement. Thank you. Ernie Ocampo, good evening po KDP at sa inyong mga sirs to Prof. Butch Valdes and Sir Itos. Mabuhay ang Pilipinas at KDP. Mabuhay. Mabuhay ka, Ernie. Mogin Clarito Jeffers, mabuhay ang KDP. Neri Galario, good evening KDP, mabuhay. Jose Aquino, isa na namang bansa na sinira ng Amerika at nakawala sa tanikala ng US. Let it be governed by Taliban. Anyway, it's their land and country to develop. Nonel Les Saints, wala naman talaga intensyon tulungan ng Afghanistan para umunlad. Yung poppy field sila ang target ng kanong. Neri Galario, good evening mga KDP, mabuhay po kayo. Alex Yorka, they said to us Osama bin Laden who staged 9/11. Thus they blamed it to Taliban. They've been staging war in Iraq, Libya, Syria, etc. What do they have about doing this to mostly Middle East nations and Islams for that matter? Yun na nga. Encinas Roel, palagay ko po hindi obra nuclear power plant sa Mindanao dahil palagi may lindol sa Mindanao. Chairman? Naka-mute ka yan. Sige.
Well, alam niyo po, yung pinag-aaralan nila kung saan maglalagay ng nuclear power plant at na-desisyonan nila na maglalagay sila sa Bataan. Ang pinagkaisahan po ng mga geological studies, mga engineers, mga civil engineers at lahat pa ng grupo na naghanap ng mga iba-ibang lugar. No? Nakahanap po sila mga 6 na lugar dito sa Mindanao na pwedeng lagyan ng nuclear power plant. Pero ang modelo ng nuclear power plant noon, katulad ng nasa Bataan ngayon, ay napakalaki. No? Ang mga bagong nuclear power plant ngayon po ay maliliit na at compact para pong mga kotse. Dati malalaki mga kotse, no? Ngayon mga bantam na, no? Pero kasing bilis lang. Ganyan din po ang nangyayari ngayon sa mga nuclear plants. So we can put up smaller nuclear power plants dispersed in Mindanao, maybe 2 or 3 units of 300 megawatts each. And that is going to be tremendous for the development of Mindanao. And also in the Visayas, for example, in Cebu, I would suggest maybe one on each side, north and south side of Cebu nuclear power plants. Kasi pwede po nating ikabitan ng desalination plants na kung meron kang nuclear power, nagbibigay ng kuryente at magagamit mo din yung excess heat gawa ng nuclear desalination plants. Kasi ang problema po ng Cebu ay tubig. No? Kung saan po nag-i-import ng tubig yan. Pero kung meron kang desalination plant na nuclear, ang kukunin mo, tatanggalin mo lang yung alat sa tubig dagat at yun na ang magiging tubig na pwede niyong mainom at pwede din gamitin sa sakahan. Marami po ngayon sa teknolohiya na kayang-kaya na pong gawin ng mga scientifico.
I wanted to add lang sa comment na every year there are 5,000 plus minor earthquakes that happen in Japan every year. Mga 160 po is major na magnitude of 5 or higher. In the Philippines, 150 earthquakes a year, minor and major. So, and Japan has 54 nuclear power plants po. They found a way to live with it and not to battle it, but to may technology na po na nandyan na hindi naman totally earthquake-proof, but very safe. And yung record po ng ating the world nuclear energy, nuclear plants around the world, and since the start in 1950s po, is the safety record is much better than any other energy source, lalo na yung coal. Okay, so yung fear na yun, hindi po, it's a bit unfounded na to say that kasi maraming earthquakes. Makakahanap po tayo at sabi nga ni Chairman, maraming mas maliliit. Yung teknolohiya ngayon, iba ng klase, hindi lang natin ginagamit. Yun yung nakagalit nga dito sa KDP because we had hope because itong presidente natin, pagkapasok niya, sabi niya gusto niya nuclear power. Tapos dinidribble niya tayo, parang si Ogas. Hindi lumalaban kay Pacman, dinidribble lang hanggang sa dulo. Tapos wala pa rin nangyari sa nuclear power program natin. Yun ang frustrating. Okay, more text. Manuel Eda, Prof. Butch and Cerritos watching here in Orange County, California. Good discussion of Afghanistan and other issues. Thank you, Manuel. Christina Olego, apektado rin po pala tayo kapag may nangyaring di maganda sa ibang bansa. Yes po. Kaya we have to find out and protect ourselves. Kaya nire-relate po natin. Kahit sa ibang bansa tayo pumunta sa talakayan natin ngayon, every Sunday, bumabalik po tayo anong epekto sa Pilipinas, anong lessons natin na para hindi mangyari sa atin. William Laguno, can you put it up? William Laguno, tama po kayo sa itos, kaalaman na lang panlaban natin sa panloloko nila sa atin. Lucy Chan, please discuss the role of lithium in the Afghan war. Okay, we need to research more on that. Johnny Ventosa, I do not know if this will reach you. Thank you, Butch. Your share is so very timely. Johnny Ventosa. Is that it? Meron pa yata mga text messages. Nawala yung mga text messages natin. Where? Are you there? Ayun. Christina Olego, napakabigat na po ang topic nyo ngayon. Napakasensitibo po talaga. Pero important information naman po. At yung di naman namin nalamay, nalalaman namin. Yung po objective namin. Actually, yung history ng Afghanistan, medyo concise pa nga yun. Medyo ancient history kasi yun. Pero it shows na sa pag-ano ng panahon, iba-iba yung nagmamayari ng Afghanistan. Arok Alip, meron na ka-assign para i-take down ang KDP channel ata. Yun ang ginagawa ng mga alipores ni Dito. Sana naman hindi. De Vera Jacqueline, Sir Butch, Sir Itos, bakit po walang nakikinig kaya sa tatlong sangay ng gobyerno natin? Sa blueprint ng KDP na matagal na panawagan para sa kaunlaran ng Pilipinas. Hindi kaya sa ayaw nilang paunlarin ang mga nasa babang antas sa buhay dahil ang alam nila mangmang pa rin ang mga Pilipino, Sir Butch and Sir Itos. Chairman, you want to comment? Or why haven't they listened to us?
Well, sinagot na rin yung tanong niya. No? Kasi ang talagang intention nila ay magsinungaling at gawin mangmang ang taong bayan. Pag gawin mong mangmang ang taong bayan, madaling takutin at kaya mong gawin lahat ng mga katiwalian na pinaplano mo, yung mga korupsyon, ganyan, no? Paano silang kikita, paano nanakawin ng kaban ng bayan, no? Yan ang mga yan ang kanilang gusto para mawala sa kakayanan ng taong bayan maglabas ng karaingan.
Siguro tulad lang ng yung time ng Spanish colonial period po natin. Nung sakop tayo ng Espanya, ayaw nila magbigay ng public education or free education. Kasi ayaw nila matuto yung mga tao. Kasi pag natuto yung mga tao, aalsa sila. So, okay. Marisa Cesar Soberano, present mga katipuneros at guro. Marisa Buyaw, watching from Hong Kong, mabuhay po kayo. Simon Bolivar, wow, what a name, Simon Bolivar. The Taliban vowed to destroy the poppy field. The question is what to replace them with. My answer is that Afghanistan is rich in rare earth minerals. Now, the Afghans have control of them. They can plant whatever they want in their fields already. They don't have to rely on poppies for income. Quote, the mailing Shah, Afghanistan sits on 1 trillion minerals. Correct. The problem is they are not yet fully in control. We still don't know kung ano yung mangyayari sa kanila. Hopefully, they will be given independence. But if history is any indication, tapos yung nandito, marami pong interesado dyan sa mga minerals. At syempre, yung mga kumikita sa drug trade, yung mga kumikita sa pagbenta ng droga, hindi sila magpapatalo. So I think we can expect a little bit more medyo gulo in the coming months or the coming period. Matt Dusain, thank you for your Sunday KDB presentation on the Taliban occupation of Afghanistan. 95% of the world's supply of heroin, 330,000 hectares in northern Afghanistan during the Obama era, correct. He's a crackpot, same as Jack Dorsey. Si Jack Dorsey po, yung boss ng Twitter. So, sila daw ni Obama, ano yung tawag yan? Loko-loko, lukaret, or may tama. William Laguno, mabuhay KDP, Sir Butch, Sir Itos, tuloy lang ang tamang pagpapahayag ng totoo. Thank you. Marian Alcala, gandang gabi po, more power to your program. Johnny Ventosa, I heard that Taliban is for the nation, contrary to news. The evacuation was all for optics. Hope so. Yes, Mr. Ventosa, that's also what we've heard. But again, until it's clearer, let's see what actually is happening. The thing that we must keep in mind also is that kung anong sinabi ng mainstream media tulad ng CNN, MSNBC at lahat, usually opposite ang nangyayari. So pag pinanood natin yung mga CNN, ABS-CBN, GMA, yung mga mainstream media pati dito tungkol sa Taliban at tungkol sa Afghanistan, usually po 95% of the time opposite ang totoo. Okay? Antonio Cristobal, mabuhay ang KDP. Go nuclear power or go broke. Correct. Leonard Toledo Evangelista. Good evening po, Prof. Butch, Sir Itos, at sa lahat ng viewers ng Katipuneros. God bless us. Randy Castillo, good evening mga sirs. Mabuhay ang KDP. Napanood ko sa Gravitas kung sino ang naglikha ng Taliban. Yes, 54 nuclear power plant. Dito walang brownout. I'm assuming you're from Japan. Meron pa. Encinas, Roel, salamat po sa paglilinaw. Read nuclear power plant. Mabuhay po kayo pagpalain. Shalom. Thank you, Roel. Yes, yung nuclear po is the most efficient and the safest, the cleanest, lahat na. And the most powerful technology we have today. If we don't start with nuclear power program, we cannot go into any massive infrastructure program sa Pilipinas at hindi magde-develop ang Pilipinas. Okay? It's not a choice, it's a necessity at this point. Raf XB, following a simple principle. If they say, quote, darkness is the absence of light, it is the truth. But if they say, quote, light is the absence of darkness, they are lying. Thank you for KDP for being the guiding light. Yeah. Melchor Herminio, restricted palate yung KDP channel. Bantay sarado tayo ng mga DPS. Actually, I would say that KDP dito sa Pilipinas, along with our allies and friends, Gising Maharlika, concerned doctors, lahat na, pati si Cap Val, is one of the most popular channels now kasi kami lang po ang nagbibigay ng katotohanan. Wala ko po kayong makukuha from any other channel, and lalo na from any other political party. We are a nationwide political party, and we have been saying this for a long, long time. And it's part of a worldwide movement towards the truth. Marami pong nagigising sa buong mundo. And here, we are doing our part fighting this battle for humanity, Filipinos and for humanity. Chairman, you want to add to that?
Hindi, tama yan. Well, according to, this is our commitment. This is our commitment to the country. This is our commitment to the Filipino people. No? And an assurance and working towards the assurance that the next generation will be living a better quality of life than what we have now. That is our duty, and that is what we would like to be able to achieve. We're not real politicians, bagamat we are a national political party, the KDP. We're not real politicians, but we have a political party that is promoting these ideas. For example, we are a political party wherein we are a party of principles and not of convenience. We are a party of ideas and not of personalities. No? Kinakailangan po mga prinsipyo at ang pagsasama, magsama-sama tayo dahil pare-pareho ang ating layunin, pare-pareho ang ating iniisip para sa kapakanan ng taong bayan. Huwag tayong magsama-sama, pamparami, maski iba-ibang ating pag-iisip at kung ano-ano mga intention natin. That is what we mean by convenience. Kasi mga ibang partido po, gusto lang magparami, sama-sama na lang, bahala na kung sinong kakampi mo. No? Hindi po ganyan. Ang pagsasama po ay dahil may prinsipyo kayong itinutulak at itinataguyod. No? We are a party of principles and not of convenience. Yung isa naman, we are a party of ideas and not of personalities. Ideas po ang importante. Ano ba ang ideya mo tungkol sa solusyon ng bansa, tungkol sa foreign affairs, sa ekonomiya, mga ganyan. Kinakailangan ilalabas natin po yung mga ideas na ganyan. Hindi yung pipili tayo ng personality na artista na wala talagang planong dahil popular lang siya, sasali na siya sa politika. Hindi po yun no? So we are a party of ideas and not of personalities, no? Kasi yung mga iba mag-a-attack ng mga artista diyan, sasayaw dun sa entablado para makakuha ng boto. Di po ganyan no? Sa amin po kakaiba. Maski na hindi po wala kaming pera, no? Yan po ang aming itinutulak. At naghahanap po tayo ngayon ng kung sino man pwedeng maging leader para itulak natin bilang presidente sa darating na panahon. At itong taong to kinakailangan matapang, at kayang labanan ng mga kalaban ng bansa, kayang labanan ng mga drug lords, kayang labanan ng korupsyon, kayang labanan ng mga oligarko, no? Kayang labanan ng mga terorista at hindi natatakot. Meron tayong leader dyan, kunwari lalabanan niya, pero sa totoo lang, duwag. Hindi naman siya lumalaban. So, yung ayaw niya daw ng korupsyon, pero laganap ang korupsyon sa kanyang administrasyon. So, may mga ganyan. So, kailangan hanapin natin ito. Hindi naman siya kailangan napakatalino. Sentido común lang ang importante. No? At pagmamahal talaga sa mamamayang Pilipino. Yan ang hanapin natin. Kasi yun.
Okay. Text. Okay. Yes. Braveheart. Mayaman sa lithium ang Afghanistan. Okay. Arok Alip, tulad ng ginawa ni Digong ngayon, akala niya puro mangmang ang boboto sa kanya, kaya hindi siya nahihiyang gumawa ng kasinungalingan. Okay, that's it. Are we good there? Okay, that seems to be it for tonight, Chairman. You're muted.
Okay, sa ngalan po ng ating mga katipon dito sa ating katipunan at sa magagaling na staff ng DCXL Radio Mo Nationwide, kami po ay pansamantalang nagpapaalam at nagpapasalamat na sinamahan niyo kami ngayon ng Ora de Peligro ng ating bayan at ng buong mundo dito po sa ating katipunan. Hanggang sa linggo pong muli, mga katipon, 7 to 9 p.m. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Thank you.